The wagon wheel cracked clean in half just as Tessa Sullivan's last coin slipped through a hole in her pocket and disappeared into the Nebraska dust. And she knew right then that her father had been right all along when he said, "She carried bad luck like other women carried parasols." She stood there on the rutted road 3 miles outside Valentine, Nebraska, staring at the broken wheel with the kind of weary acceptance that comes from 22 years of watching good things turn sour. The August sun beat down merciless on her shoulders, and the horse hitched to her dead father's wagon stamped nervously, as if even the animal could sense the dark cloud that seemed to follow her everywhere. Her trunk of belongings, everything she owned in this world, sat in the wagon bed, and now she was stranded on a road that stretched empty in both directions like a promise nobody intended to keep. Tessa wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand and tried not to cry. Crying never fixed anything, and she had learned that lesson young. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, an unlucky start if ever there was one. Her father had spent 20 years telling her she was cursed, and then he had gone and proven it by dying of a heart attack 3 weeks ago, leaving her nothing but debts, this broken wagon, and a stubborn determination to start over somewhere new. She heard the horse before she saw the rider. The steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth grew louder, and she turned to see a lone cowboy approaching from the direction of Valentine. He sat tall in the saddle, silhouetted against the bright sky, and even from a distance she could see he rode with the easy confidence of a man who belonged to this hard country. Tessa straightened her spine and tried to look less desperate than she felt. The last thing she needed was charity from a stranger, even if she was absolutely going to need charity from a stranger. Pride was expensive, and she was dead broke. The rider drew closer, and she could make out more details. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore a dusty brown hat, a faded blue shirt, and a gun belt that suggested he knew how to handle himself in rough country. His horse was a sturdy paint, well cared for despite the dust of travel. He slowed as he approached, and Tessa saw his eyes take in the situation with one sweeping glance. The broken wheel, her worn dress, the exhaustion on her face. She braced herself for the usual reactions. Pity, maybe. Suspicion, probably. Men in this territory did not trust women traveling alone, especially women who looked like they were running from something. "Looks like you have got some trouble," he said, reining his horse to a stop. His voice was low and steady with a hint of warmth that surprised her. "Just a broken wheel," Tessa said, trying to sound matter-of-fact. "I can manage." He swung down from his horse with fluid grace and walked over to examine the damage. Up close, she could see he had gray eyes that crinkled at the corners as if he smiled often. He crouched down beside the wheel, and she noticed his hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked for his living. "This wheel is not getting fixed on the side of the road," he said after a moment. "You would need a wheelwright, and the only one around here is back in Valentine." "I know," Tessa said quietly. He stood and looked at her directly, and she felt the full weight of his attention. It was not pity in his eyes, she realized. It was something closer to understanding. "You got anyone waiting for you?" he asked. "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "I am heading to my uncle's ranch about 20 miles north of here. He does not know I am coming. That is a long way to travel alone. I did not have much choice." Tessa felt her cheeks burn. "My father passed, and there was nothing left for me back in Missouri. My uncle wrote to us once, years ago, said if we ever needed anything we should come out to Nebraska. So here I am." The cowboy was quiet for a moment, studying her with those steady gray eyes. Then he said, "What is your name?" "Tessa Sullivan." "Well, Miss Sullivan, My name is Grant Evans, and I work at the Double E Ranch about 5 miles from here. I am heading back there now." He paused, then added, "I can get your horse unhitched, tie him to my saddle, and we can come back with a proper wagon to fetch your things. You can wait in town, or if you would rather not waste the time, you are welcome to ride with me to the ranch. My boss, Mr. Callahan, is a decent man. He would not mind putting you up for a night while we sort this out." Tessa hesitated. Everything in her wanted to refuse, to insist she could handle this herself. But the sun was already past its peak, and she had no money, no food, and no realistic way to fix this situation alone. Sometimes pride was a luxury she simply could not afford. "Why would you help me?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me." Grant smiled then, and it transformed his whole face. "Out here we help each other. It is how we survive." He tilted his head slightly. "Besides, you look like you have had a run of bad luck, and I figure everybody deserves a chance for things to turn around." "Bad luck," Tessa repeated, a bitter laugh escaping before she could stop it. "That is putting it mildly. My father used to say I was born unlucky. Sometimes I think he was right." Grant looked at her for a long moment, and then his smile widened into something warm and genuine. "Then your luck just changed," he said simply. "Come on, let us get you sorted out." Something in the way he said it made Tessa believe him, just for a moment. She nodded, suddenly too tired to argue, and watched as he efficiently unhitched her horse from the broken wagon. He was patient with the animal, speaking in low, soothing tones that calmed the nervous gelding. Within minutes, he had secured the horse and helped Tessa up onto his paint. She sat in front of him, acutely aware of his presence behind her, the solid warmth of him at her back. His arms came around her loosely to hold the reins, and she caught the scent of leather and sage and honest sweat. It had been so long since anyone had been close to her, since anyone had treated her with simple kindness, that she felt tears prick at her eyes. "Hold on," Grant said quietly. And then they were moving, his horse carrying them both with steady strength toward the Double E Ranch. The land rolled out around them in waves of golden grass, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings and clusters of cottonwood trees that marked where water ran. The sky stretched enormous overhead, so blue it hurt to look at. Tessa had spent her whole life in Missouri, but Nebraska felt different, bigger somehow, emptier, like a place where a person could disappear entirely or maybe find themselves for the first time. "How long have you worked at the Double E?" she asked, more to break the silence than from real curiosity. "About 3 years now," Grant said. "I came out from Kansas after the war. Was not much left for me there, so I drifted west and ended up here. Mr. Callahan took me on as a hand, and I have been here ever since." "You like it?" "I do. It is honest work, and the land has a way of getting into your blood. Some days are harder than others, but I wake up in the morning glad to be here." He paused. "What about you? What was your life like in Missouri?" Tessa considered how to answer that. The truth was complicated and painful, full of a father who blamed her for her mother's death, and a string of small disasters that had followed her through childhood and into adulthood. Broken dishes, spooked horses, crops that failed the year her father let her help with the planting. She had learned to make herself small, to expect nothing, to believe the whispers in town that said she was touched by misfortune. "Quiet," she finally said. "My father was not an easy man, and after he died, there was nothing keeping me there. My uncle's letter was old, but it was the only option I had. Does your uncle know you are coming?" "No." I did not have money for a telegram, and I did not want to wait for a letter to reach him and a reply to come back. I just sold everything we had, bought the horse and wagon, and started west. She laughed softly, without humor. "I suppose that was another piece of bad luck, not letting him know. For all I know, he is dead too, or moved on, or the address is wrong. You have been carrying a lot on your own, Grant said, and there was no judgment in his voice, only a quiet acknowledgement that made something tight in her chest loosen slightly. They rode in silence for a while, and Tessa found herself relaxing despite her circumstances. There was something steady about Grant, something that made her feel safer than she had in months. Maybe years. She did not trust the feeling. In her experience, safety was an illusion that vanished the moment you started to believe in it. The Double E Ranch came into view as they crested a gentle rise. It was a sprawling operation, with a main house built of weathered wood, a large barn, several corrals filled with horses, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Tessa could see men working in the distance, moving cattle from one pasture to another, their shouts carrying faintly on the wind. Grant guided his horse toward the main house and dismounted, then reached up to help Tessa down. His hands were firm on her waist, and she felt the strength in them as he lifted her easily to the ground. For a moment they stood close together, and she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Interest, maybe, or curiosity. Then he stepped back and turned toward the house. "Wait here," he said. "Let me talk to Mr. Callahan." Tessa watched him stride up to the house, his boots crunching on the hard, packed earth. She felt suddenly self-conscious, aware of how she must look. Her dress was dusty and wrinkled from travel, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, her face probably streaked with dirt and sweat. She had left Missouri with hope, however fragile, that she could start fresh somewhere new. Now here she was, stranded and penniless, dependent on the charity of strangers. The door opened before Grant could knock, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was older, maybe 50, with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades under the prairie sun. He listened as Grant spoke to him in low tones, his eyes flicking to Tessa with sharp assessment. She lifted her chin and met his gaze steadily. She might be down on her luck, but she was not going to cower. After a moment, the man nodded and walked over to her, Grant following a step behind. "Miss Sullivan," the man said, tipping his hat. "I am John Callahan, and this is my ranch. Grant here tells me you have had some trouble on the road." "Yes, sir," Tessa said. "My wagon wheel broke a few miles back. I am heading to my uncle's ranch north of here, but I am afraid I am stranded until I can get the wheel fixed." "What is your uncle's name?" "Thomas Garrett. He wrote to my father some years back, said he had a spread about 20 miles north of Valentine." Callahan's expression shifted slightly, something like recognition crossing his face. "Tom Garrett. I know him. Good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but he has a solid operation." He studied her for a moment. "You look like you have been through it, Miss Sullivan. Why don't you come inside, get cleaned up, and have something to eat? We can send someone back for your wagon and belongings, and in the morning we will get that wheel fixed and you on your way." Relief flooded through Tessa so powerfully that she swayed slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough. "I appreciate your kindness. I do not have money to pay you right now, but once I reach my uncle, I can." Callahan waved a hand, cutting her off. "No need for that. Out here, we look after folks who need help. You just get yourself sorted and we will figure the rest out." He turned back toward the house, and Grant touched Tessa's elbow gently, guiding her to follow. Inside, the house was surprisingly cool and comfortable, with simple furniture and curtains that filtered the harsh sunlight. A Mexican woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and Callahan introduced her as Maria, the ranch cook and housekeeper. Maria took one look at Tessa and immediately ushered her down a hallway to a small washroom, clucking sympathetically in a mixture of Spanish and English. She heated water for Tessa to wash with, provided clean towels, and even found a simple cotton dress that was worn but clean and would fit reasonably well. Alone for the first time in hours, Tessa sank down onto a wooden stool and let herself feel the full weight of her exhaustion. Her hands were shaking, she realized. Reaction to the stress, probably. She had been holding herself together through sheer willpower, and now that she was safe, at least for the moment, her body was reminding her that she was only human. She washed slowly, scrubbing away the dust and grime of the road, and changed into the borrowed dress. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman who looked older than her 22 years, with shadows under her dark eyes and sharp cheekbones that spoke of too many lean meals. But her hair, when she brushed it out and pinned it up properly, still gleamed dark brown in the lamplight, and her eyes still held a stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. When she emerged, Maria led her to the kitchen and sat her down at a large wooden table. Within minutes, a plate of food appeared. Beef stew with thick chunks of meat and vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven, butter, and a glass of cool water from the well. Tessa's stomach cramped with hunger, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, to not wolf down the food like a starving animal. Grant appeared in the doorway as she was finishing, and she looked up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Mr. Callahan sent some of the boys back to get your wagon," he said. "They will bring it to the barn, and tomorrow morning we will get that wheel fixed up proper." "Thank you," Tessa said. "I do not know how to repay all this kindness. Do not worry about that." Grant pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. Maria brought him a cup of coffee, and he cupped it in his hands, his eyes never leaving Tessa's face. "I have been thinking about your situation. Your uncle's ranch is a fair distance from here, and the road can be rough. If you would like, I could ride with you tomorrow, make sure you get there safe." Tessa blinked in surprise. "That is generous of you, but I could not ask you to take that much time away from your work. You are not asking, I am offering." He took a sip of his coffee. "Truth is, I need to head up that direction anyway. We have been trading some breeding stock with the ranches north of here, and I am supposed to check in with a few of them. It would not be out of my way." She suspected he was bending the truth to make it easier for her to accept, but she found she did not care. The thought of traveling alone, of arriving at her uncle's ranch without knowing if she would be welcome, was daunting enough. Having Grant along would make it easier, and not just for practical reasons. There was something about him that made her feel steadier, more hopeful, as if his calm certainty could rub off on her somehow. "All right," she said quietly. "If you are sure it would not be too much trouble." "No trouble at all." He smiled at her, and she felt warmth bloom in her chest, unfamiliar and a little frightening. She had not let herself feel attraction in years, had learned to wall off that part of herself after too many men in Missouri had looked at her with either pity or suspicion. But Grant looked at her like she was just a woman, normal and whole, and it stirred something she had thought long dead. They talked as the evening darkened into night. Grant told her about the ranch, about the work of managing cattle in this harsh country, about the challenges of drought and storms and the occasional cattle rustler. Tessa found herself relaxing, telling him things she had not spoken of in years. About her mother, who she had never known but always mourned. About her father's bitterness and the way he had blamed her for every misfortune that befell them. About the loneliness of growing up believing you carried a curse. "That is a heavy burden for a child to carry," Grant said when she finished. "But you know it is not true, right? Bad luck is not something a person is born with. Sometimes life is just hard and things go wrong, and it does not mean anything about who you are." "I wish I could believe that," Tessa said. "But it seems like everywhere I go, things fall apart. The wagon wheel today was just the latest in a long line of disasters." "Or," Grant said slowly, Maybe the wagon wheel breaking was the best thing that could have happened to you today. If it had not broken, you would have passed right by here, and we never would have met. You would have made it another few miles down the road before dark and had to camp alone in unfamiliar country. Instead, you have a safe place to sleep tonight, a hot meal in your belly, and help getting to your uncle's place tomorrow. He leaned forward slightly. Seems to me that is pretty good luck. Tessa stared at him, struck by the simple logic of what he was saying. She had spent so long looking at every setback as confirmation of her curse that she had stopped seeing the good things that sometimes followed. The kindness of strangers, the unexpected help, the way things sometimes worked out despite her fears. I had not thought of it that way, she admitted. Maybe it is time to start, Grant said gently. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, until Maria bustled in and shooed them out of her kitchen, saying it was time for decent people to be getting to bed. Grant showed Tessa to a small guest room off the main house, clean and simply furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the prairie. "Sleep well," he said from the doorway. "I will wake you at first light and we will get your wagon fixed and be on our way." "Grant," Tessa said, and he paused, turning back to look at her. "Thank you for everything. You did not have to help me, but you did, and it means more than I can say." His smile was soft in the lamplight. "You are welcome, Tessa. I am glad I came along when I did." After he left, Tessa lay down on the bed, still fully dressed, and stared up at the ceiling. She was exhausted, but her mind would not stop turning over the events of the day. The broken wheel, Grant's appearance like something out of a storybook, the kindness of the Callahans and their ranch. And most of all, the way Grant had looked at her. Like she mattered. Like she was worth helping, not out of obligation but because he wanted to. She fell asleep thinking about gray eyes and a quiet voice saying, "Then your luck just changed." Morning came bright and clear, the sun rising over the prairie in shades of gold and pink. Tessa woke to the sound of roosters crowing and men's voices calling to each other as they started the day's work. She washed quickly, dressed in her own clothes that Maria had cleaned overnight, and made her way to the kitchen. Grant was already there, eating a plate of eggs and bacon while talking with Mr. Callahan. They both looked up as she entered, and Grant stood immediately, pulling out a chair for her. "Morning," he said. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Tessa admitted. The bed had been comfortable, but more than that, she had felt safe for the first time since her father died. It made all the difference. Maria served her breakfast, and Tessa ate while listening to Grant and Callahan discuss ranch business. The wheel had been repaired late last night by one of the ranch hands who had some skill at woodworking. Her wagon and belongings were secure in the barn, and her horse had been fed and watered and was ready to travel. "You take your time getting to Tom Garrett's place," Callahan said to Grant. "No rush getting back here. Make sure Miss Sullivan arrives safe and sound." "Yes, sir," Grant said. "We should make it there by late afternoon if we start soon." After breakfast, Grant helped Tessa hitch her horse to the wagon while he saddled his paint. The repaired wheel looked solid, and Tessa sent up a silent prayer that it would hold for the rest of the journey. She climbed up onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins in her hands, and Grant mounted his horse beside her. They set out as the sun climbed higher, following a road that wound north through rolling grassland. Grant rode alongside the wagon, easy and relaxed in the saddle, and they talked as they traveled. He asked about her life in Missouri, and she found herself telling him things she had never shared with anyone. The small joys she had found in difficult circumstances. The books she had loved to read, borrowed from the town library. The garden she had kept, coaxing vegetables from stubborn soil. The dream she had nursed in secret of someday having a place of her own where she could be free from her father's shadow. You will have that, Grant said with quiet certainty. Your uncle will take you in and you will build a new life here, I can feel it. How can you be so sure? Tessa asked. You barely know me. I know enough, he said. I know you are brave enough to leave everything familiar and travel alone into unknown country. I know you are strong enough to keep going even when things go wrong. Those are the qualities that matter out here. The land does not care about luck, good or bad. It just cares about whether you are willing to work and whether you have the grit to keep trying when things get hard. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. He looked at her with those steady gray eyes. You have got what it takes, Tessa. You just need to start believing it. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Maria had packed for them. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree near a small creek, and Tessa watched the water flow past while she ate cold chicken and biscuits. The prairie stretched out in all directions, vast and empty and beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. It is so big here, she said quietly. Back in Missouri, everything felt closed in, but here, it is like the world goes on forever. That is what I love about it, Grant said. There is room to breathe, room to be whoever you want to be without everyone watching and judging. He tossed a pebble into the creek, watching the ripples spread. When I first came out here after the war, I was a mess. I had seen things, done things that I could not shake off. But this land, it gave me space to heal, to remember who I was before all that. Were you a soldier? Tessa asked. For the Union, yes. I was young when I enlisted, thought it would be an adventure. His face darkened. It was not. But I survived when a lot of good men did not, and I figured I owed it to them to make something worthwhile of my life. So I came west, found work, and tried to be decent. That is all any of us can do, really. Tessa felt a surge of sympathy for him. She had her own scars, her own pain, but at least she had never gone to war. I am sorry you had to go through that. It made me who I am, Grant said simply. I do not regret it, even though it was hard. The hard things shape us for better or worse. They continued north after lunch, and as the afternoon wore on, Tessa found herself growing nervous. What if her uncle did not remember writing that letter? What if he had no room for her, no use for another mouth to feed? What if he was like her father, bitter and resentful, and she had just traded one difficult situation for another? As if sensing her anxiety, Grant moved his horse closer to the wagon. It will be all right, he said. And if for some reason it is not, if your uncle cannot take you in, you can come back to the Double E. Mr. Callahan could always use help in the house, and Maria has been saying she could use an extra pair of hands. You would have a place, Tessa. You are not alone in this. His words steadied her more than he probably realized. Just knowing there was a backup plan, that she would not be cast adrift no matter what happened, made it easier to breathe. The Garrett Ranch appeared in the distance as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was smaller than the Double E but well maintained, with a sturdy house, a barn and corrals holding horses and a few dozen head of cattle. Tessa felt her heart hammering as they drew closer. A man emerged from the barn as they rode up, shading his eyes against the sun. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 40s, with sandy hair going gray and a weathered face. He watched them approach with the cautious interest of a man who did not get many visitors. Tessa pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, her legs unsteady. Grant dismounted beside her, his presence a comfort at her back. "Can I help you folks?" the man called. "Are you Thomas Garrett?" Tessa asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "I am. Who is asking? My name is Tessa Sullivan. You wrote to my father, James Sullivan, about 10 years ago. You said if we ever needed anything, we should come out to Nebraska." She paused, then added, "My father passed recently, and I have nowhere else to go. I am sorry to arrive unannounced, but I did not have means to write ahead." Thomas Garrett stood very still for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he walked closer, studying her face with intense focus. "James Sullivan," he repeated slowly. "He married my sister Catherine." "Yes," Tessa said, her throat tight. "My mother. She died when I was born." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a softening around the eyes. "You look like her," he said quietly. "Same dark hair, same stubborn chin." He glanced at Grant, then back to Tessa. "I am sorry about your father. He was not an easy man, but I know he had a hard time after Catherine passed. We lost touch over the years, but I always wondered about you. Wondered if you were all right." "I got by," Tessa said. "But after father died, there was nothing left. I found your letter in his papers and hoped the offer still stood." "Of course it does," Thomas said immediately. "You are family, Tessa. You are welcome here for as long as you want to stay." He turned to Grant and offered his hand. "Thomas Garrett, thank you for bringing my niece safely here." "Grant Evans from the Double E," Grant said, shaking his hand. "Miss Sullivan had some trouble on the road, and I was glad to help." "Come inside, both of you," Thomas said. "It is nearly supper time, and you must be tired from traveling." The house was simple but comfortable, clearly the home of a man living alone but making an effort to keep things tidy. Thomas busied himself making coffee and setting out bread and cold meat, all the while asking Tessa questions about her journey and her life in Missouri. She answered honestly, not hiding the difficulties or her father's coldness, and Thomas listened with a sadness in his eyes that said he understood more than he spoke. "I should have stayed in touch better," he said finally. "After Catherine died and James made it clear he did not want my help, I let it go, but I should have checked on you, made sure you were all right." "It is not your fault," Tessa said, "and I am here now." "Yes, you are." Thomas smiled at her, a genuine warmth that made her feel welcome for the first time in longer than she could remember. "We will make this work, Tessa. The ranch is not big, but it is profitable and I can use the help. We will figure out a life for you here." Grant stayed for supper, and Tessa found herself wishing the meal would last longer, wishing he would not have to leave. She had known him less than 24 hours, but already she felt a connection to him that defied logic. He made her laugh with stories about life on the Double E, and he treated her uncle with easy respect that Thomas clearly appreciated. When it was time for Grant to head back, Tessa walked outside with him while he saddled his horse. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red, painting the prairie in shades of fire. "Thank you," Tessa said, "for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." "You would have figured something out," Grant said. "You are resourceful." He tightened the cinch on his saddle, then turned to face her. "But I am glad I was there. I am glad I got to meet you." "Will I see you again?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Too revealing, too hopeful, Grant's face softened. "The Double E is not that far from here. I could ride over sometime if you would like. Check in, see how you are settling." "I would like that," Tessa said quietly. He mounted his horse, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "Take care of yourself, Tessa Sullivan, and remember what I told you. Your luck has changed. Good things are coming." She watched him ride away until he disappeared into the gathering darkness, and she stood there for a long time after, feeling the warm evening breeze on her face and trying to understand the strange mix of hope and longing that filled her chest. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Thomas put Tessa to work immediately, and she was grateful for it. She helped with the cooking and cleaning, learned to care for the horses, and even started helping with some of the lighter ranch work. Her uncle was patient and kind, nothing like her father, and slowly Tessa began to relax into this new life. But through it all, she thought about Grant. She caught herself looking down the road whenever she heard hoofbeats, hoping it would be him. At night, lying in the small bedroom her uncle had given her, she replayed their conversations in her head, remembering the way he looked at her, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to her. 3 weeks after she arrived, Thomas mentioned casually over breakfast that he needed to ride over to the Double E to discuss a horse trade with John Callahan. Tessa's heart leaped, but she kept her expression neutral. "Would you like company?" she asked. "I would not mind seeing Maria again, thanking her properly for her kindness." Thomas gave her a knowing look but did not comment. "Sure. It would do you good to get off the ranch for a bit. We can leave after lunch." The ride to the Double E took about 2 hours, and Tessa found herself growing nervous as they drew closer. What if Grant was not there? What if he was, but he had forgotten about her, moved on to more pressing concerns? What if she had imagined the connection between them? But when they rode into the ranch yard, Grant was the first person she saw. He was working with a young horse in one of the corrals, moving with the same easy grace she remembered. He looked up as they approached, and his whole face lit up when he saw her. "Tessa," he said, vaulting over the corral fence and striding toward them. "I did not know you were coming today." "My uncle had business with Mr. Callahan," she said, trying to sound casual while her heart hammered in her chest. "I thought I would come along." "I am glad you did." Grant helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "How have you been? How are you settling in?" "Good," she said. "Really good. My uncle has been wonderful and the ranch is beautiful. I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years." Grant's smile widened. "I told you your luck had changed." Thomas and John Callahan disappeared into the house to discuss business, and Maria pulled Tessa into the kitchen for coffee and gossip. But after a polite interval, Tessa excused herself and found Grant waiting outside, clearly having done the same thing. "Want to go for a walk?" he asked. "I can show you the rest of the ranch." They walked together through the late afternoon sunshine, past corrals and outbuildings, down to a creek that ran through the property. They talked easily, catching up on the weeks they had been apart, and Tessa felt that same sense of rightness she had felt the first day they met. Like this was where she was supposed to be with this man in this moment. "I have been thinking about you," Grant said suddenly. They had stopped by the creek, watching the water flow past, and his admission hung in the air between them. "I have been thinking about you too," Tessa said quietly. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know you have just started building a new life here, and maybe the last thing you need is someone complicating things. But I would like to see you again, Tessa. Properly, I mean. I would like to court you, if you would be willing." Tessa felt joy and fear war inside her. Joy because this was what she wanted, what she had been hoping for without letting herself fully admit it. Fear because she had spent so long believing she was unlucky that good things turned sour in her hands. "I am afraid," she whispered. "What if I ruin this? What if my bad luck hurts you somehow?" Grant reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Tessa, there is no such thing as a person who carries bad luck. You have had hard things happen to you, but that is life. That is just being human. It does not mean you are cursed or broken or any of the things you have been told." He squeezed her hand gently. "I see you, the real you. And I like what I see. You are strong and brave and kind, and I want to know you better. Will you give me that chance?" She looked up at him, at the honesty and warmth in his face, and felt something shift inside her. A loosening of old fears, a tentative reaching toward hope. Maybe he was right. Maybe she could stop waiting for disaster and start believing that good things could last. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." His smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so sweet and old-fashioned that it made her breath catch. From that day forward, Grant became a regular presence in Tessa's life. He rode over to the Garrett Ranch at least twice a week, always with some excuse. He was checking on breeding stock in the area. He was delivering a message from John Callahan to Thomas. He was passing through on his way to town. The excuses were thin, and both Tessa and Thomas saw through them, but neither minded. Grant and Tessa spent hours together, riding across the prairie, sitting by the creek on her uncle's property, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he loved to read, that he had a weakness for apple pie, that he dreamed of someday having his own ranch. He learned that she was fiercely intelligent despite limited schooling, that she had a dry wit that caught him off guard and made him laugh, that she was slowly beginning to believe she deserved happiness. Thomas watched their courtship with approval. One evening, about 2 months after Tessa's arrival, he sat down with her after Grant had left for the night. "That is a good man," Thomas said without preamble. "Honest, hard-working, decent. He cares about you, Tessa. I can see it plain as day." "I care about him too," Tessa admitted. "But sometimes I worry. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose him like I have lost everything else?" "You did not lose everything else," Thomas said gently. "You lost your mother before you ever knew her, which is tragic but not your fault. You had a father who was too broken by grief to be the parent you needed, which is sad but also not your fault. You had bad things happen, but so does everyone. The difference is, you were taught to blame yourself for it." He reached across the table and took her hand. "It is time to stop carrying that burden, Tessa. You deserve to be happy. Let yourself have this." His words lodged in her heart, and she thought about them often in the days that followed. Let yourself have this. It sounded so simple, but it required a fundamental shift in how she saw herself and her place in the world. One Sunday in October, Grant arrived at the ranch with a picnic basket and a request. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." They rode out together, Tessa on her horse and Grant on his paint, heading east toward a section of the prairie she had not yet explored. The autumn air was crisp and clear, the grass turning golden, the sky an impossible blue. After about an hour, Grant led her to a spot where the land rose slightly, offering a view for miles in every direction. "This is it," he said, dismounting and helping her down. "This is the land I have been saving for." Tessa looked around, confused. "What do you mean?" "I have been putting aside money for 3 years now, and I finally have enough. Mr. Callahan has agreed to sell me this section. It is not huge, but it is enough to start. Enough to build a house and barn, to run a small herd." He turned to look at her, his eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Enough to build a life. Understanding dawned, and Tessa's heart began to race. Grant took both her hands in his. "I know it is soon. We have only known each other a few months, but Tessa, I am sure about this. I am sure about you. I love you. I love your strength and your courage and the way you laugh when you think something is truly funny. I love how you see the world, and I want to be the person who shows you that you deserve every good thing this life has to offer." He took a shaky breath. "I want to build a life with you on this land together. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks, but for the first time in her life they were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Grant, I love you too. I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, gentle at first and then with growing passion, and she kissed him back with all the hope and love and gratitude in her heart. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Grant was grinning like a fool. "We are going to be so happy," he said. "I promise you, Tessa, I will spend every day of my life making sure you know how loved you are." "I believe you," she said, and she meant it. They were married in Valentine in early November in a simple ceremony at the small church on Main Street. Thomas gave her away, beaming with pride. John Callahan and Maria came from the Double E, along with several of the ranch hands who had become Grant's friends. The whole town turned out, curious about the young woman who had arrived in the summer with nothing, and was now marrying one of the most eligible bachelors in the county. Tessa wore a simple white dress that Maria had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Grant had picked that morning. She felt beautiful as she walked down the aisle toward him, watching his face light up at the sight of her. When they said their vows, her voice was strong and sure. She was not afraid anymore. She was choosing this, choosing him, choosing to believe that her luck had truly changed. After the wedding, there was a reception at the hotel dining room with food and music and dancing. Tessa danced with her new husband, laughing as he spun her around the floor, and she felt lighter than air. She danced with her uncle, who hugged her tight and told her how proud her mother would have been. She even danced with John Callahan, who gave her fatherly advice about marriage and ranching that made her both laugh and tear up. As the sun set, Grant and Tessa left the reception and rode out to their land, to the small cabin Grant had been building for the past month with help from Thomas and the other ranchers. It was simple but sturdy, with one large room that served as both living space and bedroom, a stone fireplace and windows that let in the prairie light. Grant had furnished it with basics: a bed he had built himself, a table and chairs, a cook stove, some shelves. But to Tessa, it was perfect. It was theirs. Grant carried her over the threshold, and they stood together in the center of their new home, arms around each other, looking out the window at the land that stretched away in all directions. "Are you happy?" Grant asked softly. "I did not know I could be this happy," Tessa said honestly. "For so long I thought happiness was for other people, but it feels real. It feels like it is going to last." "It will last," Grant promised. "We will make it last together." That night, in the bed he had built with his own hands, Grant made love to his wife with tenderness and passion. Tessa had been nervous, inexperienced, but Grant was patient and gentle, showing her with his body what he had already told her with words: that she was beautiful, desired, loved beyond measure. She gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, and when they lay tangled together afterwards, she felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. The first winter on their land was hard work, but filled with joy. Grant and Tessa worked side by side every day, caring for the small herd of cattle Grant had purchased, improving the cabin, preparing for the future they were building together. In the evenings, they sat by the fireplace, Grant reading aloud from books while Tessa sewed or mended, or they simply talked, learning each other in the way that newlyweds do. Thomas rode over often to check on them and help with the heavier work. John Callahan stopped by occasionally with advice or extra supplies. The community that had seemed so foreign to Tessa when she first arrived now felt like home. These people had welcomed her, helped her, celebrated with her. She was no longer the unlucky girl from Missouri. She was Tessa Evans, rancher's wife, beloved by her husband and accepted by her community. Spring came, and with it the hard work of calving season and spring roundup. Tessa worked as hard as any ranch hand, her body growing strong from the labor, her confidence growing with each challenge she met and overcame. Grant watched her with pride and love, and often pulled her into his arms in the middle of the day just to hold her close and tell her how amazing she was. One evening in late May, Tessa was feeling queasy after supper. She had been tired for days, more emotional than usual, and certain smells made her stomach turn. She caught Grant watching her with a knowing look, and when she met his eyes, she saw hope and joy there. "You think," she whispered. "I think maybe," he said gently. "How do you feel?" "Scared," she admitted. "But happy." "Is that strange?" "Not at all." He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "If you are carrying our child, that is a blessing. And you are going to be fine, Tessa. You are strong and healthy, and we will get you to the doctor in town to make sure everything is going well." The doctor confirmed it 2 weeks later. Tessa was pregnant, due in late January. Grant was so excited he could barely contain himself, and even Tessa's fears could not dampen the joy that bubbled up inside her. She was going to be a mother. She was going to give Grant a child. They were creating a family together. Her pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the summer heat was brutal and made her swell in uncomfortable ways. Grant was attentive and loving, taking on extra work so she could rest more, bringing her cold water from the well, rubbing her aching feet in the evenings. Maria rode over from the Double E several times with advice and herbal remedies for morning sickness, and Thomas brought baby things he had saved from when Tessa's mother was born. In January, as the prairie lay frozen under a blanket of snow, Tessa went into labor. Grant rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife from Valentine, and Thomas stayed with Tessa, holding her hand and telling her stories about her mother to distract her from the pain. Labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Tessa was certain she would not survive it. The old fears came rushing back. She was unlucky. Something would go wrong. She would die like her mother had, leaving Grant alone and broken. But Grant was there through all of it, never leaving her side, his steady presence anchoring her. "You are going to be fine," he told her over and over. "You are strong. You can do this. I love you." At dawn, as the sun rose over the frozen prairie, Tessa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He came into the world squalling with fury, his face red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. The midwife placed him on Tessa's chest, and she looked down at her son with tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered to Grant, who was kneeling beside the bed, his own face wet with tears. "We have a son." "You did it," Grant corrected gently. "You were so brave, Tessa. I am so proud of you." They named him James Thomas Evans, after both their fathers. Jamie, they called him, and he was a happy, healthy baby who rarely fussed and seemed to take everything in with wise, observant eyes. Tessa had worried that motherhood would be another thing she would fail at, another way her bad luck would manifest. But she took to it naturally, her love for her son as fierce and protective as a mother wolf. She nursed him and rocked him and sang to him, and watched in wonder as he grew and changed day by day. Grant was a devoted father, getting up with her in the night when Jamie cried, walking the floor with the baby on his shoulder, making silly faces to coax out smiles. Watching them together, Tessa felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. This was her family. This was the life she had built from nothing, from a broken wagon wheel and a chance encounter with a lonely cowboy on a prairie road. The years passed in a rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. The ranch prospered, growing slowly but steadily as Grant proved himself a skilled cattleman and Tessa managed the household and helped with the ranch work when she could. Jamie grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere. When Jamie was 3, Tessa became pregnant again. This time there was less fear, more confidence. She knew her body could do this. She knew she was strong enough. Their daughter was born in August in the heat of summer, an easy birth compared to Jamie's. They named her Catherine Maria, after Tessa's mother and the woman who had shown Tessa such kindness. Katie had her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she was stubborn and sweet in equal measure. Thomas was a constant presence in their lives, a doting uncle to the children and a trusted advisor as Grant expanded the ranch. John Callahan became a good friend and mentor. Maria treated Tessa like a daughter, teaching her to cook Mexican dishes and sharing wisdom about marriage and motherhood. One evening, when Jamie was 5 and Katie was 2, Tessa and Grant sat on the porch of their house after putting the children to bed. The cabin had been expanded over the years, with additional rooms and a real porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The ranch stretched out before them in the gathering darkness, peaceful and prosperous. "You remember the day we met?" Tessa asked, leaning against Grant's shoulder. "Every detail," Grant said. "You were standing by that broken wagon, looking like the world had beaten you down, but you were not going to stay down. I knew right then you were someone special." "I thought I was cursed," Tessa said quietly. "I truly believed that bad luck followed me wherever I went. But you saw something different." "I saw the truth," Grant said. "That you were just a woman who had been through hard times and needed a helping hand, and that if you got that help, you would do something amazing with it." "I told you I was unlucky," Tessa remembered, smiling at the memory. "And you said my luck just changed." "And it did," Grant said. "For both of us. That day changed my life, Tessa. You changed my life. Before I met you, I was just drifting, working, saving money, but not really living. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to build something that would last. You gave me hope," Tessa said. "You made me believe I could have this, that I deserved this." She gestured to the house, the land, the life they had created. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real. That I get to wake up every day next to you, that we have 2 beautiful children, that we built all this together." "It is real," Grant said, kissing the top of her head. "And it is going to keep being real for the rest of our lives. We are going to grow old together, Tessa. We are going to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. We are going to make this ranch something they can be proud of." "I love you," Tessa said simply. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Grant said. "Always." The years continued to unfold in a tapestry of ordinary days and extraordinary moments. Jamie learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, and spent his childhood helping his father with the cattle and horses. Katie was quieter, preferring to stay close to her mother, learning to cook and sew and garden. When she was 7, she announced that she wanted to learn to read better than anyone in the county, and Tessa made the long ride to town every week to borrow books from the small library. When Jamie was 10 and Katie was 7, Tessa became pregnant again, a surprise after several years of no babies. She was older now, 32, and the pregnancy was harder than the first 2. But in March, she gave birth to twin boys, identical and healthy despite arriving a month early. They named them Samuel and Simon, and the household erupted into joyful chaos. Grant built another addition to the house to accommodate their growing family. The ranch now employed 3 full-time hands, men who lived in the bunkhouse Grant had built and who treated Tessa with respectful affection. The Evans Ranch was becoming known in the region as a place where cattle thrived and good horses were bred. Grant's reputation as a fair and honest dealer meant that buyers came from as far away as Denver to purchase his stock. Thomas grew older, his hair going fully white, his movements slower. But he was still sharp as a tack, and he spent most of his time at the Evans Ranch now, teaching his great-nephews and great-niece everything he knew about ranching and horses and the land. He told them stories about their grandmother Catherine, keeping her memory alive for children who would never meet her. One spring day when Tessa was 36, she and Grant rode out to the spot where he had proposed to her all those years ago. The children were home with Thomas, and Grant had insisted they needed a day to themselves. They spread a blanket on the ground and ate the lunch Tessa had packed, then lay side by side watching clouds drift across the endless blue sky. Do you ever wonder how different things would have been if that wagon wheel had not broken? Grant asked lazily. All the time, Tessa admitted. I would have made it to Thomas's ranch, probably, but I might not have stayed. I was so scared back then, so convinced I would bring him bad luck. I might have kept running, kept trying to outrun whatever I thought was chasing me. And we never would have met. And we never would have met, Tessa agreed. She rolled onto her side to look at him. That wagon wheel breaking was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it brought you into my life. Grant pulled her close and kissed her, still passionate after more than a decade of marriage. No, he said against her lips. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. The wagon wheel just introduced us. But you, Tessa Evans, you are the reason I believe in fate. You are the reason I know that good things come to people who are brave enough to keep trying. They made love there on the prairie, under the open sky, with the wind whispering through the grass and the sun warm on their skin. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, talking about their dreams for the future. Jamie would take over the ranch someday, they thought, though they would never push him if he wanted something different. Katie wanted to be a teacher, and they would support her in that. The twins were still young, wild things who might become anything. As the sun began to set, they packed up and rode home together, side by side as they had been since that first day. When they crested the rise and saw their house in the distance, lights glowing warm in the windows, children's voices carrying on the evening air, Tessa felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Are you all right?" Grant asked, seeing her expression. "I am perfect," Tessa said. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be, with exactly who I am supposed to be with. I am home, Grant. Finally, truly home." He smiled at her with all the love in his heart shining clear in his eyes. "Welcome home, Tessa Evans. Welcome home." The years rolled on, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep when he was 78, leaving his ranch to Tessa. She and Grant combined the two properties, creating a substantial operation that provided well for their family. John Callahan also passed, leaving the double E to his son, who remained a good friend and neighbor. Jamie married at 22, bringing home a sweet young woman named Lucy from a ranch to the east. They had 3 children in quick succession, and Grant and Tessa found themselves grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. Katie did become a teacher, running the small school in Valentine and eventually marrying the town doctor, a kind man who loved her intelligence and fire. The twins left home at 18 to seek their fortunes further west, but they wrote often and came home every Christmas. Through it all, Tessa and Grant remained the center of each other's world. They worked side by side through drought and plenty, through hard winters and glorious springs. They grieved losses together and celebrated triumphs together. They sat on their porch in the evenings, grown older and grayer but still holding hands, still finding joy in simple conversation. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration at the ranch. There was music and dancing and a feast that Maria, now quite elderly but still spry, helped to prepare. As the party wound down and the stars came out, Jamie stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught us that love is a choice you make every day, that hard work and integrity matter, that family is everything. You built something from nothing and you gave us a foundation we can build on. We love you both so much." Everyone raised their glasses and echoed the toast, and Tessa felt tears slip down her cheeks as Grant squeezed her hand. Later, when everyone had left or gone to bed, they sat alone on the porch under the stars. 30 years, Tessa marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was standing by that broken wagon, convinced my life was over. and sometimes it feels like I have been with you forever." "Both are true," Grant said. "The best 30 years of my life, Tessa, and I am looking forward to 30 more." "Do not be greedy," Tessa laughed. "We would be ancient. I do not care. I want every minute with you I can get." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Tessa said softly, "You know what I realized today? I have not thought about being unlucky in years. Decades, really. That whole belief, that whole way of seeing myself, just fell away somewhere along the line. I do not even remember when it happened." "I do," Grant said. "It was gradual, but I saw it. Every time something went right. Every time you took a risk and it paid off. Every time you looked at our children or our land or me with joy instead of fear. You chose to stop believing in that old story and start believing in a new one. A story where you are the hero, Tessa. Where you are loved and capable and deserving of every good thing." "You helped me write that story," Tessa said. "I could not have done it without you." "We helped each other," Grant corrected. "That is what marriage is, I think. Writing a story together that is better than either of us could have written alone." Tessa leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of his body against hers. She thought about the terrified young woman she had been, alone on a prairie road with nothing but fear and a broken wagon. She thought about the cowboy who had seen past her fear to the person she could become. And she thought about all the years since, the life they had built together, the love that had sustained them through everything. "My luck did change," she said quietly. "The moment you came riding down that road, my whole life changed. You saved me, Grant, in every way a person can be saved." "No," Grant said, his voice gentle but firm. "You saved yourself, Tessa. You were brave enough to accept help, brave enough to try again, brave enough to believe you deserved love. I just had the honor of being the man you chose to love. But you did the hard work. You changed your own luck by refusing to give up." Tessa smiled in the darkness, knowing he was right. They had saved each other, really. Two lonely people finding each other at the exact moment they both needed it most. It was not luck, good or bad. It was grace. It was choice. It was the simple, profound miracle of two people deciding to build a life together, and then doing the work to make that life beautiful. As the years continued to pass, Grant and Tessa remained devoted to each other and to the land they had cultivated. They watched their grandchildren grow up, welcomed great-grandchildren, saw the ranch pass to the next generation. Their love story became part of the family lore, told and retold at gatherings. The story of how Grandma Tessa's wagon broke down and Grandpa Grant rescued her, and how from that chance encounter came a love that lasted a lifetime. When Grant was 72 and Tessa was 68, he passed away peacefully in their bed, holding her hand after a brief illness. Tessa grieved him deeply, missing him with an ache that never fully went away. But she did not fall apart. She had learned too much, become too strong. She continued to run the ranch with Jamie's help, continued to take joy in her family, continued to greet each day with gratitude for the life she had been blessed to live. She lived another 10 years after Grant's death, and in that time she told her story often to anyone who would listen. Not just the story of meeting Grant, but the whole story. About believing she was cursed, about learning she was not, about the power of choosing hope over fear. About how one moment of kindness from a stranger can change the entire trajectory of a life. On a warm September afternoon, Tessa Sullivan Evans passed away in her sleep at the age of 78. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered for her funeral, and they buried her next to Grant on the land they had built together, under the endless Nebraska sky. The headstone was simple: beloved wife, mother, grandmother. Her luck changed the day we met. The last line was from Grant's will, his final love letter to the woman who had been his whole heart. The ranch continued to thrive under Jamie's care, passing eventually to his children and then to theirs. But the story of Tessa and Grant lived on, told around dinner tables and at family gatherings, a reminder that luck is not something you are born with or without. It is something you create through courage and hard work, and the willingness to accept love when it is offered. And somewhere in the great mystery beyond this world, two souls found each other again. A cowboy and the woman whose broken wagon wheel brought them together, still side by side, still holding hands, still writing their story together, now and forever, in a place where wagon wheels never break and love never ends.